Thank you for joining us here in breakout room number 3, where the topic is "The Time is Now for Environmental Justice," an issue concerning people throughout the country and Puerto Rico. So let's tune in, and don't forget, following this important conversation, please return to the main room as we continue the State of Latino America.
Hello, my name is Cintia Ortiz, Environmental Justice Fellow here at LULAC. Thank you so much for joining us and being part of this conversation. I'm here with José Bravo, Executive Director at the Just Transition Alliance, Esther Sosa, Project Manager at the Environmental Defense Fund, and Felipe Benítez, Executive Director at Corazon Latino. Thank you so much. Let's get started with hearing a little bit about your organizations that you represent and how it works with the Latino community. Felipe, would you like to go first?
Thank you very much, Cintia. Thank you, Jose, Esther. It's a pleasure to join you in this important conversation. What Corazon Latino is a national organization that focuses on reconnecting Latino communities with nature. So why do we say reconnect? Because we as humans, as Latinos, have a natural connection with our Mother Earth. It is part of our DNA. It's part of our education, of our heritage. Sometimes we forget about it, or sometimes we don't are actively doing it. So what Corazon Latino tries to do is to create programming opportunities that make Latino communities welcome, that feel included, and that they're relevant or that resonate with our culture and with our language. So that's what we do. We work with a lot of federal agencies, organizations, and those who really want to create a meaningful connection with Latino communities and nature.
Jose, would you like to go next?
Yes, I just want to give a little bit about background. I did attend the first People of Color Environmental Justice Summit in Washington, D.C. in 1991. I was part of the drafting team for the Principles for Environmental Justice. And I also was one of the drafters of the HEMES Principles for Democratic Organizing. I think that's important to be said because those are two landmark documents that really help us keep environmental justice in the frame of environmental justice. And so moving forward, I just want to mention that I'm also Executive Director of the Just Transition Alliance. The Just Transition Alliance is an alliance between networks, environmental justice networks, and organizations, and union labor in the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, now known as the United Steelworkers.
Thank you. And Esther?
Yes, my name is Esther. First of all, thank you for hosting such an important discussion. EDF's mission is to preserve the natural systems in which all life depends, and the purview of the organization expands from climate to oceans, ecosystems. And since these topics are intertwined, EDF solutions are multidisciplinary. So EDF works with a concert of organizations, from businesses to government to community organizations, to help foment climate action. I work with our national Latino organizations to understand how climate change is disrupting the livelihoods of Latinos across the United States. I then use the big picture data that the EDF resources allow me to help make sense of some of these experiences. And I'm particularly interested in helping communities understand how all of these issues intersect, from jobs to health, as we've seen with COVID. And I'm so excited to dive into some more of these topics in this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for the work that you are doing. And which brings me to my first question. Let's get into it. How does climate change disproportionately impact Latinos and other communities of color? And how is it evident in the work that you do? And if Jose, would you like to get started on that?
So, climate change, I think, there's several ways that it impacts Latinos. First of all, it impacts migration of Latinos from South and Central America because of the lack of water or other types of natural catastrophes that are happening because of climate change. And then communities here in the United States, it impacts because we happen to have the lion's share of industrial uses that cause climate catastrophe. And for us, it impacts not only on the fact that our communities already have high rates of asthma, many other health issues that are correlated to the contamination that's happening in our communities. Climate change makes that greater, makes it worse. So it impacts our communities here as well. And if you talk about the farm worker, one of our organizations is the National Environmental Farm Workers Alliance. And if you talk about farm workers out in the field, who are primarily Latino, but at the same time, we're having other immigrants being part of that reality in the field. Here in California, I'm in San Diego, California, but if you go into the Central Valley, you see that heat indexes usually go up to about 117 degrees. And our people are still expected to be working out in 117-degree weather. So again, climate change has made that situation worse. And with the pandemic, of course, it has really, really caused a lot of problems with people's health in our communities, primarily Latinos. We work with Líderes Campesinas in California. And, we are trying to get the word out that farm workers need to get vaccinated first as essential workers. Before, they were unskilled workers. Now they got renamed as essential workers without the pay and without the protections.
Cintia, if I may just build on what Jose just said, I think it's also important to mention that the negative effects of climate change, like hurricanes, or we had last year an unprecedented BC hurricane season, which saw Central American communities, Central American countries deeply affected by two hurricanes, one after the other, comes a few years after Maria. We also seeing constant floods in Houston, the unprecedented fires in California, as Jose was mentioning. So our communities are suffering not only in their health, but also affecting their well-beings, their pockets. So that's what it means, at least from my perspective, being on the frontline communities. We are being the first one affected. If you go to Miami, rising sea levels. If you go to any part of the country or the world or in the continent where climate change effects are being felt, are being present, it is our communities that are suffering. So I also wanted to add what Jose just said, because we're on the front line, we're suffering, but we're also creating resiliency to make sure that our communities continue to be strong and continue to be part of the solution. So I just wanted to add that, and I'm sure Esther has some ideas to share.
Yeah, I mean, Latinos understand that we are only as healthy as our environment, right? And therefore, it comes as no surprise that when we partnered with Latino Decisions to really understand how Latinos are thinking about climate change, that 87% across party lines believe that climate action by Congress and the government and the president is really necessary, right? And it's because we are at the front lines of it all, right? Whether it be the displacement that happened after Hurricane Maria that brought a lot of Puerto Ricans into the United States, right? People who loved their country, loved being in Puerto Rico, and now we're faced with this new reality, right? This is a new reality that our community is facing. Or whether it's the farm workers that Jose mentioned that became essential workers but had to continue working through the fires, through the heat waves, or whether it's construction workers in Nevada or Arizona, where we know that it's becoming hotter in these places, but they still have to continue to go to work, right? Every day. There's no climate day or there's no day off for them. And these are the stories that we are saying that we're trying to elevate and figure out, like, what is the solution? What is the path forward? And under this administration, there's so much opportunity, and I'm so excited for it, right? Because of all of the injustices that we've seen are historical, as José mentioned, right? It's not that they just happen now, but the experiences that Latinos are facing is compounded by a racist history of the United States, right? Racist history where we were only allowed to buy in a certain area of town, right? And then that town became a bad area. So the government didn't want to invest in it, right? So it became a suppressed area and the values of those properties decreased. So industry was able to move in and buy land at very cheap prices. But those are all things that are so interconnected that I'm looking forward to discussing more.
Yeah, absolutely. And you all mentioned something that's very important and to want to touch up on again, and COVID-19 and how that relates to climate change and issues like poverty and health. How do these issues intersect? And Esther, would you like to jump on that?
Of course. We know that with COVID-19, we saw there is a correlation between high levels of hazardous pollutants and COVID mortality rates. And we're not saying that. There are studies that were made that prove that this is actually true, right? In April 2020, Harvard released a study to link those correlations, right? And then there were some questions about this study. So there was a new study that tested those results, and it also found that that's held true, right? That if we have bad air quality, then that really then that is directly linked to whether we are impacted by COVID or not, right? And this isn't one offshoot pandemic, right? It's something that will continue to happen, right? And now that we know, at first we were told, oh, COVID's going to be the great equalizer, right? And then we saw, no, actually, it wasn't the great equalizer, right? It really revealed some of the inequities that we've been living through this entire time, right? And that's good because now we know, right? Like there are more pandemics that are coming down the pipeline because of a warming planet, right? And how are we addressing some of those inequities? Yeah, I'm sure Felipe and José would have more to say here.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that because, you know, I was listening the other day, I was driving and I was listening to NPR and the mayor of Dallas was on talking about the fact that even COVID vaccinations are now being redirected to white communities. This is the mayor of Dallas talking about this situation happening. And when he was asked why, he said, well, it's because of race, and it's because of income, and it's because of political clout. That white communities have the political clout to be able to redirect some of those resources, in this case, vaccines, to white communities. And I thought to myself, wow, you know, here's the mayor of Dallas saying this. For years, we've said that the reason why industries in our community is because of race, is because of income, and is because of political clout. And I would add that in many instances, the reason as well that we have in Houston, as Felipe was talking about, Right next to a school, we have a pesticide plant. By the way, the name of the school is Cesar Chavez. And we have a pesticide plant. The reason why, too, is because of infrastructure. The fact that for many years, we've had no zoning. And if we do have zoning in our communities, it includes heavy industry right up to sensitive use. So again, even zoning rules and regulations have caused what we're living with. So I wanted to mention that because here in San Diego, it's no different. You know, people might say, "Oh, San Diego, you know, everybody goes over there and has a you know vacation and things like that." But I can tell you that I can take you on a reality tour of what you don't see on the brochures for people visiting San Diego and coming here to recreate. I also wanted to mention, you know, a little bit off topic in regards to access to green areas. You know, I know it's Felipe's and Esther's goal to get folks, you know, into the natural environment. You know, we came up with an MOA, a memorandum of understanding, with the regional forester here in the Cleveland National Forest. Why? Because even when our people would go to the forest, they would have the Border Patrol call on people just by profile, not because they were there recreating. They would say, "Oh, you know, there's a car full of Mexicans going to the snow at the Cleveland. Let's call Border Patrol." On one instance, they called the Border Patrol on this woman that was driving through, and she happened to be the wife of a lawyer for the Forest Service, who then said, "This has got to stop." So we entered into an MOA. I think it's important to just highlight the situations that are occurring in our communities and make sure we understand the big picture, right? And many instances, you know, they say, "Oh, these industries are in your community because we want to offer you jobs." Well, let me just say this. You know, I work with unions and I work with other workers, non-unionized workers. And I always tell people that, you know, the jobs issue is a wedge issue in our community. They should offer us jobs that don't put our health at risk and don't put the community at risk.
I thank you, Jose, for bringing that up. I think access to green spaces, access to nature is of the most importance right now. Again, going I mean, nature, we all know that it makes us feel good, that we get more relaxed, that we feel great, but it's actually proven with a vast body of scientific studies that show that nature actually helps boost our immune system, relaxes, brings our stress down, and actually help us individually, help us as a community, as a family, and as a society. It brings the costs of healthcare down. It makes our properties go up if we have more tree canopy outside. But if you go to places like LA and you see the wealthy neighborhoods, that's where tree canopy, you go to our communities and there's a desert, literally a urban desert. And that's such an important element that now with COVID, with fires, with air quality, that really exacerbates those differences. And there's an organization called American Forest that created this term, which I love, which is tree equity, which is what is the just amount of tree canopy of forest, urban forest that our communities need to be receiving. And again, as Jose mentioned, it's clout, it's racism, it's a lot of elements that prevent us from even that simple element of getting more access to green spaces. And I will talk a little bit more down the line in the solutions part, but thank you, Jose, and I'm glad you did that with the Forest Service. You know, something that a lot of people don't talk about it is that we as simply by living in this country, by being in this country, no matter of our language, no matter of our immigration status, no matter anything, we have the right to enjoy our public lands. And we have the same right as anybody else, no matter what. And we have also the obligation, we have also to take care of those lands. So another important difference is that José probably, in his example, which I love, by the way, I love to learn more about that memorandum. Probably they were calling eyes because they were loud, because they were doing the way we as a community, as Latinos, enjoy nature is very different. And it doesn't mean there's a wrong or right way. We just enjoy ways differently. We like to be loud, we bring everybody, and that's just something that needs to be part of the decision-making process. Because think about picnic areas, think about the cost of entering some parks. Forests are usually free, but all of those elements need to be, we don't just bring mom, dad, and the two kids. No, we bring the abuelito, the abuelita, the tío, the tías, and that's how we enjoy nature. And that's how we've done it for generations. So that's really important. I'm really, really glad, Jose. And everything is interconnected, because guess what? 30% of our emissions goals, like to reduce climate change, comes from nature, comes from trees. Al Gore says that the best technology to capture carbon, I'm getting a little bit geeky, it's called a tree. If you scale that, it's called a forest. So that's part of the solution. And thank you, Jose, for bringing that. I don't want to deviate too much of the conversation, but I thought it was really, really important.
No, thank you. And actually, Jose, you brought up something very important about a Dallas mayor recognizing that race was causing people not being able to get access to vaccines, which brings me to my next question is like, some people may wonder why we should bring environmental justice to the forefront of climate crisis. Some people don't even know what environmental justice means. Jose, what would you say to that?
So the issue, I think, is who's wondering that, right? Because ultimately, it's some of the naysayers or some of the folks that are pushing false solutions that don't want to engage with people of color communities, Latino communities, and the such. So who is saying that? If it's for a reason that I wouldn't know what that reason would be, but ultimately, I think it's important to recognize that when we're talking about a climate crisis, there are solutions out there from the Just Transition Alliance, and this is going to be news to you because we do work with oil workers and refinery workers and chemical workers and atomic energy workers. The goal for us is to keep fossil fuel in the ground, to move towards renewable economies of scale, to make sure that we produce whatever we need to combat climate in our own communities first, and target those communities that are now disproportionately impacted. When we have a situation where here in California, we have AB 32, which is our climate policy, California's climate policy. AB 32, in essence, looks at the whole state and says, where can we reduce the amount of carbon being emitted, and puts out pollution credits. That's commodifying the air. That means that somebody can pay to have clean air. And those communities can't pay to have clean air. In fact, what happens is you get areas that don't need the credits, sell them back to areas in our communities so that they can pollute even more. So then we get what we call hotspots. The whole issue started, in the early 1990s with a project called Reclaim in South Central Los Angeles, where environmental organizations put together a process where they would buy old polluting cars. So who owned those old polluting cars, right? And how did they get them? They would stop us on the roads, give us tickets, impound our cars, and then by the time we could generate enough resources to get our cars out, we were paying more for the car than the car was worth. So again, you know, these situations we have to talk about. I think that, you know, it doesn't make sense for us to push for like REDs, you know, the RED program within the UN. And I go, this last year we didn't go to the UNFCCC, which is the World Climate Conference. But in France, we came together and we said, hey, let's talk about a just transition. What does a just transition look like away from fossil fuels? There was still some more work to do. There still is more work to do. But at the same time, we have to understand that those solutions, those very, very practical solutions, can come from those communities that are most devastated. We are the expert on what happens to us.
I want to jump in and I'm going to pass it to Esther because I know she will be more eloquent than I am in talking about the technologies and the opportunities that we have. But I think what Jose said about keeping the oil underground, that's something that needs to happen. But we also need to be thinking and be mindful of those workers that Jose is working, those who are in these industries. Well, guess what? The first point is we have the technology. We have the financing because there's financing out there. It's a good business to have clean energy, to invest in clean energy. It's the cheapest form of energy right now. I'm talking about solar. We just needed the political will, and the political will hopefully is now starting to come together. We're very hopeful, but we still have a long way to go. We still have to go through Congress. We still have to go through those who will make those decisions to really make this. But we have all the elements, and we have the opportunity to train, to refocus the expertise, the ingenuity, the hardworking ethics that our communities, that those workers have into a new era, into clean jobs, into clean energy, into technology that really both brings decent salaries, decent food to our table, and at the same time, it's helping us protect our Madre Tierra. So we have the opportunity. We have now all those elements. It's just a matter of really making it happen. And I think that's the real challenge and the real opportunity. And I'm going to pass it to Esther.
Yeah, and I think that, it's the opportunity, right? But it's also how people think about climate, how we talk to our communities about climate, right? We know we're not dumb. We know when our air is healthy. We know when our water is not pure. We know when our kids are poisoned by lead, right? And these are, we have to stand up. It's a moment now that we have, or never, to stand up and say, we're not going to take it anymore, right? It's not, you cannot sacrifice. There are no sacrifice zones. Sacrifice zones are not okay, not at home and not abroad. All communities should be protected from environmental harm, right? And there's been a lot of great work that's been happening. Look at the great work that Jose and Jose has done, right? That we can build upon, right? With new people, with young people saying, we need to rethink and redo this differently, right? And this is why the executive orders that Biden presented give me so much hope, right? And I don't want to be in naive hope, right? And I know there's still a lot of pushing that we need to do, and that I know we will do, right? With great environmental justice organizations that have been leading this work, right? But what he's saying is that, we know that historically we have underinvested in communities because of the color of their skin, because of their income level. And now we're trying to correct those wrongs by investing 40% of all of our capital into these communities, right? So that they can then take that money and figure out what works best for their communities, right? Some communities are working on community solar projects. And I'm so sad Elizabeth Jean-Pierre is not here to join us, because she has been leading a lot of that work in New York City. Right, but like that, there are other projects that, or green infrastructure, for example. What is green infrastructure? And that is trees, right? Planting trees. We know that redlining, which I explained earlier, there's a relationship between redlining and how hot your neighborhood is, right? Some neighborhoods are 10 degrees hotter or 15 degrees hotter than their neighboring neighborhood because of trees, right? And that's not okay, right? And these are things that we could be doing that could be invested with Biden's executive plan.
I want to mention a couple of things to that, and that's wonderful. I think that's the way to go about it. Probably about 5 months ago, I was called to be an advisor for the Biden-Harris transition team, or whoever was going to be pushing, whoever was going to come up in regards to the presidency. And it was an uphill battle. Not all our friends are understanding. One of the things that we pushed hard on and are still pushing hard with Biden-Harris is to do away with the billions of dollars that the petrochemical industry gets in subsidies and invest that money in our communities. So that's super important, because that's our money going to corporations. I would rather see those billions of dollars going to projects that Felipe is working on, or other folks that are working on in our communities, right? So moving forward, I think, this executive order and a series of executive orders that Biden has put together and has signed, I think is very important. And I think it's time. We met with him in Delaware. Folks from Delaware were meeting with him in Delaware, priming that process to come about, because it's important to make sure that people that are representing us understand the big picture, right? And when we talk about renewable energy, from the Just Transition Alliance, when we talk about leaving it in the ground or moving away from fossil fuels, the just transition didn't come from us, from the environmental justice movement. It came from the workers that saw the writing on the wall, that said, you know what, we produce things that at some point will have to go away because of the harm that it causes and what it produces. So with that, when we're talking about renewable energy, we also have to say that they have to be localized, right? So our production should be in our communities, right? We need to develop the solar panels that are going to go into our houses and train people to put those solar panels up, and then train people to maintain the grid and all those pieces. And these things have to be made with good processes and good products. When we started looking at vinyl windows because we wanted to weatherize homes, everybody started saying, oh, let's go get double windows. I have double windows here at the house. But what we didn't understand is that vinyl itself is very poisonous. And if you go to Louisiana, you go to Cancer Alley, you see that companies that produce vinyl are getting bigger and expanding. Why? Because there's a need, right, for more and more vinyl. Instead, we're pushing with the administration and other folks to start looking into hemp, right, to create things out of hemp, to make sure that things are done in a way that doesn't pollute and have a cradle to cradle approach. If what we produce does not have a cradle to cradle approach, then it's not a just transition, and it's not a way that we should be pushing things.
Just 2 points to add to Jose. I'm so sorry. But it's the fact that fossil fuel industry, we don't talk about the fossil fuel industry and the aid that they receive. That's right. They are getting subsidized by taxpayer money. And why are we subsidizing a dying industry is the question that we're wondering, right? Like, it's climate change, and the changes that we need to see happen is going to happen whether we like it or not. We can start preparing for it now, or we can hold off and wait for it when it's more expensive and we're too late, right? So let's start preparing for it now, right? Like, why are we destroying our house? Like, that's not a good investment. You try, for example, it's like you try and destroy your own house. Where are you going to live, right? Like, no one in their right mind would do that. So there are opportunities, there are jobs, like the green jobs are things that our community is already doing, right? Like, it's construction work, it's carpenting, it's plumbing, are things that we already have the skills to do, right? And are prepared. We just need a direction, an investment, and someone to, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I have to jump in. I got to push back a little bit on Esther, because no, our Mother Earth, it's screaming at us right now. The time is now. I mean, scientists say that we have 10 years, and I want to say, yes, we still have 10 years. But our Madre Tierra, it's like, see what happened last year. See the extreme weather patterns that we're seeing. It's like, this is your last chance, dude. This is it. If you don't take care of this, I'll take care of it. It's not going to be pretty for you. So we really need to jump in. We on the positive side, we still have 10 years to, or scientists say that 10 years until we reach that point of no return, which it's scary, but at the same time, it's like, hey, we can do this. So I just want to share that, because I think it's important to set this sense of urgency, set the opportunity, but at the same time, leave you with the idea that there's still time and there's a lot that we can do. And again, going back to my 3 points, we have the technology, we have the financing, we now have the political will, which, by the way, and I want to underscore what Jose said. I mean, obviously, both President Biden and Vice President Harris are good people, and they know what's right. But it wasn't also that just spontaneous. Now, remember that in the first presidential debate, climate change was not even in the agenda. We have to push now. It was our voices, it was voters, it was the community mobilizing that brought this to the forefront. And now it's a priority. And we need to keep the pressure, we need to keep the accountability, and we need to make sure that it doesn't fall through the cracks. The devil's in the detail, and we need to make sure that those details, and we need to make sure that implementation is done the right way. It brings our communities to the table, and it's putting Madre Tierra in the forefront.
And I know, Cintia, that you want to get going, but I just have to mention one more thing. You know, when we're talking about the greening of the United States, this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about the greening of Mexico. We're not talking about the greening of Guatemala or El Salvador, but it all is interlinked, as Felipe is talking about, right? What we do here has implications all over the planet. So I'll give you an example, clear example. So this whole piece around solar panels, I think that if we put a solar panel on everybody's house and on every building in the United States tomorrow, we would only have 5% of the capacity to store that energy. So we don't have the battery power to store that energy. So what happens is, then here's the implication to our people, is you get mad rushes to Latin American countries to mine lithium, right? For the United States, right? To put into batteries into the United States. And they have to do more research. You know, there's a program here at UC Davis that's looking and has already developed a battery that uses salt. Salt is very plentiful, that uses salt and electrolytes, and it holds a charge, and you can recharge it using more electrolytes, which are in your body already, by the way. Your body works on electrolytes. So those are the types of innovative ideas that we have to have, so that we, again, it's cradle to cradle. If we don't do that, then our own thirst for greening and for making things right will shift burdens on our people in Latin America, people in Africa, different people. So we have to be very cautious about that.
No, thank you all so much. I think that just speaks volumes to the enthusiasm and passion that y'all have for the space and for actually creating change. So I appreciate your input. And I had a follow-up question. I know that we spoke about the Biden transitions team's executive orders, and I just wanted to follow up: is the White House doing enough right now? Are the assess? Sorry, I'm going to repeat my question. Sorry. I wanted to follow up on a question. We spoke about Biden's executive orders that were put out in the last 2 weeks. What is your assessment of these actions? Are we on the right track? Or what else needs to be done?
Well, I think the Biden-Harris administration has taken a step that hadn't been taken in the past, not by either Democratic or lesser by Republican administrations. I think they're on the right path. Have they gotten there? No, we haven't gotten there. But just for instance, we talked to President Obama about actually taking the money that they give. I don't know if folks remember, you might all be too young, but probably 10 years ago or so, the federal government bailed out the auto industry in Detroit, gave billions of dollars to the auto industry because they were going bankrupt. We went to speak with President Obama and we said, look, you're going to give $36 billion to the 4 automakers. You have to say that 60% of that has to be to be used to retool Detroit into mass transit instead of single family vehicles. Mass transit that's non-polluting, and it was done during the Second World War where Detroit was retooled for the war effort. So Detroit started building tanks, it started building airplanes, it started building Jeeps. We have to have that kind of mentality if we're going to be able to protect Mother Earth moving forward. So for us now, the Biden and Harris administration needs to really look at production. And I would love to see Detroit become the new world hub on mass transit vehicles. And when we talk about transportation, instead of those subsidies going, as Esther was talking about, to corporations, I think those subsidies should be going to mass transit as well, so that people don't have to pay to ride a bus. And there's that incentive, right? And more bus lines, and at the same time, better equipment that doesn't pollute.
Yeah, and we know that those vehicles are cheaper to own down the road, right? Because they require less maintenance. The price of electricity is cheaper, right? So these are investments that we should be making now. And to your point, it is one of the strongest climate policy that we've seen in US history, right? And climate policy that places racial justice and social justice at the center of it, right? That says, yes, we've done a lot in our history that we're not proud of, and we want to make it better, because that is what America is about, right? America is about, it's about all of us together, right? And it makes it clear that the 21st century agenda in the 21st century America, we shouldn't have to choose between a healthy environment and jobs, right? Those two are interlinked and intertwined, and that's how we're going to move forward. So it's a first step, and I'm very excited. But like Felipe and José have been talking about, right? It requires people putting pressure constantly, not forgetting, right? Reminding their local, state, federal representatives that they are experiencing climate change and now, right? And that they need action now, not in the future, right? And those are conversations that need to be had all the time, because it's easy to forget once you're in DC.
And I want to add that it is a step in the right direction, to use the cliche word, but it's really starting to undo all the, and I'm going to use the word, the criminal actions from the last administration. I mean, 100 rollbacks in EPA, taking us out of the Paris Agreement, eliminating science from decision-making in our government. That's just criminal. And it's just getting us back to where we should have been 4 years ago, or maybe more. I think right now it is the next steps we want to make sure that that Congress, because that's where it goes now, where actually how do we make this good intentions, this down payment that some of our colleagues are calling, how do we make this actionable? So before it used to be, no, it's too expensive. When moments like when the Green New Deal came out, like, who's going to pay for that? Well, guess what? A year, almost last year, when we were obviously facing at the beginning of the crisis, the COVID crisis, Congress came together and found $3 trillion to get us out of the hole. I'm not sure we were successful, but again, it is possible. If we put our efforts, if we put the political pressure, the political will into this, we can find the money, we can find the resources, we can find the way to really do what Jose was referring to. So I feel very positive that it sends the right signal, but now we need to make sure that Congress, then we go to city levels, which, by the way, in city levels, things are going well, but at state level and a local level, because that's where we're going to see the real action. It's not with a signature. It's great to have that moment. It feels really not good, but now we got to go all the way to city council, all the way to the education committees in our communities, because they are going to make those decisions and figure out how to really implement this motion that came out from the White House. So I just want to say that, and by no means the job is done. We're just getting started, and now more than ever we need to really step up as a community, and really, because the stakes are the future of, not even of, as I said, Mother Earth will continue. It's our own subsistence. It's the future of our kids, of our families. So if there's something else more important, I would love to hear it. But I think for our community, the choice is very clear.
I do want to mention one thing. We worked on chemical policy, TSCA reform, the Toxic Substance Control Act, a federal policy, and there was a lot of learning lessons there. One of the biggest lessons is that in the United States, the term that the tail wags the dog is literally very, very apparent. I'll tell you why. Because the only way we were able to move federal policy is to have strong state policies. Because at that point, we had 17 states, and that's what it took to move federal policy, because industry said, oh my God, how can we comply with 50 different regulations, right? Okay, make a strong federal policy, but take what you learn from the states and make sure that whatever federal policy moves forward doesn't preempt state laws. We have very good state laws here in California, but a federal policy shouldn't preempt our good laws, right? It should be the best law that's applied, be it local, federal, and state. So we have to make sure that if we're pushing the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration to do these things, I think we got to do our due diligence and start helping them by passing strong state legislations that would force the accountability at the federal level.
Jose, you bring up a great point, and pushing for legislation. Is there any legislation that we should be aware right now, or any legislation that your organizations will be pushing forward to?
You caught me off guard with that. I think that, you know, there's some things that we want for future work. One is that you know, this year in 2021, sorry, we are going. It's going to be the 30th anniversary of the People of Color Summit. No, we want to codify the executive order that was signed under the Clinton administration on environmental justice. That includes a lot of what we're talking about: access to green areas, you know, the disproportionate impacts pieces. We want to make sure that the federal government starts codifying it and making it into law, not just an executive order. So those are things that are important. I think that for our people, the biggest, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is immigration reform, right? What's it going to look like? What's it going to look like? And understand why we have to, as environmental justice people, understand the role of immigration policy in the United States. It's because this country, along with other developed countries, has been causing migration. So it is in our responsibility to do something about it.
We are making two big pushes. I'm just going to jump in. The first big push is on electrifying our transportation system. We know that gas vehicles let out a lot of pollution for our communities, right? And those are concentrated. Those highways, those truck depots are concentrated in communities of color, in Latino communities. And we're saying, we have the technology now, the electric vehicles, electric buses, so that no longer is an issue of the future. And then the second thing that we're saying is that we need to make sure that our energy base is carbon neutral. And what that means is that it comes from renewable energy sources, the sun, the wind, thermal, right? We have the technology to do that, so that we do not have refineries in our backyard, so that we're not breathing that unhealthy air, right? And those two work in concert with one another. And we're excited to see where that goes.
And I would just add, because I know we're on time, I think continuing with the green infrastructure, trees, access to green spaces, making sure that programs so specific like the urban forestry program at the Forest Service, which has been was not funded for several years, that those get money, because guess what? That's what urban forestry is code word for trees out in your neighborhood and city. So that those programs are funded, that we are investing in green spaces, that we reduce the backlog in our national parks, and in our national forests, but at the same time that we're creating the opportunities, the accessibility to everybody. Like I said, everybody has the right and has the responsibility to care for our public lands. And guess what? That actually get us to that future and help us reduce the challenges of climate change. And at the same time is providing environmental justice elements.
Claro que sí,
Community
Felipe.
gardens, by the way, too.
Oh, love
Creating
it.
a process
Food security, that's a good one. And we can have a whole
food,
Claro que sí,
food
Felipe.
security is very important to us, because in many of our communities, you know, people start calling them food deserts, but I live close to a desert, and the desert is beautiful. It's intentionally deprived food areas that we're talking about. So community gardens, local produce going to communities and our schools and other places is super important, because without the proper food, you know, they're not going to sell it in a bodega, but we can grow it in the community, right?
Claro que sí. And just one quick wrap up. We've been talking a lot about action and taking action, the importance of taking action. What would you all quickly say to the audience members watching us right now to get more involved with the environmental justice movement and efforts? If you could all just speak a little bit to it before we end.
Let me go first. And Esther, who has been in many panels with me, knows that I wouldn't end without asking people to reconnect with nature. It sounds cliche, but hug a tree. I want to challenge folks to spend 20 minutes. That's all you need, 20 minutes, either in nature, with a tree in your community, even with a plantita in your house. If you are lucky enough to have access to a national park or a national forest, spend 20 minutes. That's all it takes. There's science behind this, and that will help your immune system, will help your well-being, and will give you the energy to do what's right. So for me, it's hug a tree. That's my call to action.
I'll add to get involved with your local organization, right? A lot, like Jose mentioned, a lot of things are happening at the local level. Join an organization, join a community garden, talk about these issues, connect them back to yourself and your family and your health.
I would just say that act like our 7 generations ahead depend on it.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you all so much for being here and being part of this important conversation. And thank you to the audience for joining us and watching this panel.